So today I'm going to demonstrate hiding the submit button using the JavaScript injector external module. So this came about with our antibody initiative projects where actually it was one of Colleen's projects where she was troubleshooting issues for people, and she had a problem with people submitting an issue even though they didn't even have an appointment, and she'd have to go through and clear all these records out that were just blank because she couldn't do anything with them. And so she was wondering if there was a way to hide the submit button based on, a value. And so this is the project that I created, and when the survey loads, I have it set to where the submit button hides, and it only shows if you click yes. So if you click yes, I have branching logic that just hides these fields, and the submit button appears with clicking yes. If I click no, I have it set to where the submit button hides, and I have branching logic set that points out that if the person doesn't have an appointment, they should exit the survey. Because Colleen added in her project, she added these banners that in big bold text to tell people not to submit the survey, and yet they still did. So I also have a couple of other codes that I built because we also have projects where people should only submit their survey if they're 18 or older. We also had issues where people were submitting their surveys with their incorrect email addresses. And so I created code blocks for those too as well. So let me show you what I'm doing and how I did it. So let me just move this over here. The first thing I'm doing is, so let me show you the JavaScript injector first. That way you can see it. But I'll show you the code from the other window because the JavaScript window is super tiny. So I've enabled the JavaScript injector, and then I'm just applying it to surveys for now. And here you would select which survey you want, and then you would put your code in here. Normally JavaScript is wrapped in script tags and HTML, but you would just leave that out for this. It does it for you. It also allows you to add JavaScript to other pages and other surveys. So if you have some functionality that you want only for this, and then you have a different survey that has other JavaScript, you could add that. Or if you have JavaScript that's going to apply project-wide, but then you have some specifics, you can add multiple blocks of these groups of JavaScript code. So let me cancel this, and let me show you the code that I've created. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm basically hiding the entire table row, this entire block, when the page loads. And the way I found that is if I right click on this and go to the inspect tab, you can see here that this is the button, and I tried hiding the button, and you can probably hide the button too as long as you can get to it. And there is a way in JavaScript that you can find an object based on the name here. But it was just easier for me to grab this entire table row here of survey submit and just hide the entire thing. Because what I'm doing is I'm changing this display value from table row to none. So if I just went in here and changed this to none, it goes away. And that's basically what I'm doing. So the first thing I do when I open the page is I hide it, because if you open it and it's there, chances are somebody could submit something anyway. So we take it out right off the bat. Now, the hard part was figuring out how to hook the JavaScript code to these buttons because it took me a while. I went through a number of iterations of this code because it would kind of work, but it would have problems. And the reason is these are not traditional buttons in the way that, let me go back and undo my, so this here is a button. It has a button, it's a button object. But if I right click on one of these, it's a span. And so you can't really, and really the span here, even though it's highlighting the entire button, it was only capturing the text. So if you clicked on the button in any of this area here, the code wouldn't fire. But if you clicked on the text, the code would fire. And then I had it to where there was a weird thing where if I clicked on this value would change to yes, because this, or this current appointment value would change to 1, but it wouldn't update automatically. It would still be 0. And then if I clicked it again, it would turn to 1. And if I clicked no, it would still be 1. And I'd have to click it again and it would turn to 0. So the code wasn't firing exactly the way I wanted it to. And I realized the reason why was because of these enhanced checkboxes in radio buttons. So in the survey settings, you can say you want regular or standard checkboxes in radio buttons, which would just be the little boxes in the circles. But when you do the enhanced, what happens is it takes these choices, these radio buttons, and it hides them. And it puts them off the page so you don't see them toggling back and forth. And I tried setting it to where this would be changing, and that's really what I ended up doing. So this is the input radio, and I'm calling it by the name current appointment underscore 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 radio. And the other thing with radio buttons is they're not individual objects, they're a group of objects, because with radio buttons you can only select one at a time, but they all have the same name. And so I have to check whether it's checked and what the value is. So this here is if the value is 1, meaning yes, and this here is if the value is no, meaning, or 0, meaning no. And once I figured that out, it was easy, because the only thing I'm doing now that I'm able to target the specific button is I'm just either changing the display of this from table row to none. And then once I was able to do that, then I could mirror that functionality with the age and with the email address. So if I put in today as a birth date, then the submit button goes away and I have branching logic that pops up the banner saying you must be 18 years or older to continue. And if I delete that, it goes away. And if I do my email address, and this is the same code that I had demoed a few weeks ago when I was showing you the JavaScript for the email match. So this would show you that it doesn't match, and then if I change it and I tab out of it, then it submits it auto, or then the submit button shows up. So I can walk you through that. Basically, it's the same thing. I'm grabbing this input box for the calculated field, and I'm grabbing it by its name of age right here. So I'm saying if input name equals age changes, so basically if this value gets updated, anytime this value gets updated and fires on so as I'm updating this date of birth, this is changing, and anytime this changes, it fires this code. And all I'm saying is if the value is under 18, don't display the submit button, and if you're over 18, then display the submit button. The email is a little more complicated, but basically it's the same thing. The only thing is I'm not assigning a value that I'm checking. I'm comparing one value to another. So I'm assigning a value. I'm creating a variable for the email field. It's just easier for me instead of having to type all this. So it's email 1 and email 2. And then this is also if this only runs if the second email field is changed. And so if I've already entered this and I'm typing in this one, that's where this fires, because I'm checking if email 1 and email 2 are equal, and if they are, display the submit button, and if they're not, don't display the submit button. But I also have to check if I change up here, because if I only check the second one, then if I made a mistake, you know, I would only update the second one. But if the second one was correct, so if this was my email address and the second one was correct, but I wasn't checking if the first email address was updated, then the code wouldn't fire. So I have to check both. But this one I'm checking if there's a value in email 2. So I'm saying if email 2 has a length greater or less than 0, and if email 1 and 2 is equal, then, and I think this should be greater. I'll have to check. Basically, I'm saying I'm checking if there is a value, which I believe should be greater. If there's a value, and if those are equal, then display, and if not, then don't display. And then finally, there was an issue with that I found in here where if I clicked the reset link, the submit button would show up. So even if I clicked no and hid the submit button, if I hit reset, the submit button would pop up. So the last thing I did was I grabbed this link here, and it's reset link parent. It's a small link, or current appointment row, and then small link. And then all I did was if I click on this, which I'm resetting, basically it's like reloading the survey from scratch. So all I'm doing is I'm hiding the submit button. So even if I hit yes and I reset it, then I want the submit button to go away. Now, these are just some quick demos on the things that you can add to this JavaScript functionality. You could have, instead of banners, instead of having banners like this, you could also use the JavaScript function, the injector, to create alerts that pop up and say, you know, basically says this is a window that pops up. It gives you a lot of functionality as long as you know the JavaScript, and you can get pretty crazy with JavaScript. But these are just simple examples. And if you were to implement some of these, like right now, if I said yes, but there was an age, like, so let's say I was of age, and then my email was wrong. But if I go back and fix my email, can't type. But then my age, you know, these are all independent of each other. And so if you were to create a survey like this, you would probably want to check all of these values. You would want to make sure that, yes, they had an appointment. You'd want to make sure that, yes, they were over 18, and you'd want to make sure that their emails matched. Every time you fired these little blocks of code, you would want to check those other things, because you wouldn't want something overriding something else. So it might be, you know, where they could be under 18, but the last thing that they checked was that their email was fine. Because I think if I go here and then, so this is what I'm trying to say. They're not 18, but the last code that fired was checking the email address. And as far as that code goes, it says, yep, the email addresses are the same. You're good to go. And so they could still submit that. So you would want to continue these checks within your code so that, you know, they would have to hit all these values in order to have the submit button. And then the other thing is I had the branching logic on this because I wanted the survey to open up, and the first question you ask is, do you even have an appointment? And if they say no, there's nothing they can do, because if all of these values were, or all these fields were visible, there's nothing to keep this person from typing in values and submitting it right off the bat. And so you don't even want to give them the chance to enter any data into these fields if they don't even meet the first like criteria at all. So does anybody have any questions about that? And once again, like what I do is I use this inspector a lot in the dev tools. That's how I find all these things, and a lot of it is trial and error. It took me a couple of days to narrow down this code to get this exactly the way I wanted it to, because in order to just have this func fire when I clicked on the button once, and because if I had just did the span for these, it had some really weird behavior, and you know, just trying to tease that out, it gets kind of frustrating, but sometimes you have to take a step back. The good thing is that this code, let me go to my designer here. This code actually works for the enhanced radio buttons and the standard radio buttons. So if we go back to this and reload it, it works the same. So that was really nice, because really the code that I narrowed down on is actually what's happening in the background. When you have the enhanced radio buttons, these are being toggled, but they're being toggled off the screen, so you can't even see them. There's a code in REDCap that basically is like, if you click this button, you click the yes button, it fires and then toggles this radio button off screen. And the same thing with the no. And so when I was able to finally wrap my head around that and quit trying to code for the button and actually try to just code, because I had similar to like this function here where it's on the click behavior, that's where my code was before, is like I'm coding for the yes button, you know, when you click on the yes button. But the problem is, like I was saying, the radio buttons have the same name, and so it didn't matter which button I was clicking on, and the value for this 1 or 0 wasn't being updated when my code was firing. And so I had, like, if I clicked no twice, the submit button would go away, but then it would come back. And the same thing with the yes, it would go away and it'd come back, because all it's doing was it's just checking whether or not those buttons are being clicked, and that value wasn't being updated to 0 or 1 right away. And so once I was able to back away from that and realize that what I'm really wanting is whether this radio button, this radio button group is being changed, which is what it's doing, even though it's a click event. I'm just asking, is this value being changed from 1 or 0? And once I figured that out, it was easy to add that to the code here. And this is just a shorthand for saying if this, because this is the object that I'm targeting, and instead of me having to copy this object name all the time, the shorthand for JavaScript is just this. And so I'm saying if this being this here, if this is checked, because it gives you if you look in the inspect page, you'll see that there is a checked, there should be a checked option here. because it tells you that there's a selected radio value, and I can't remember exactly where it is, but basically it's saying that in this group here, because you can see that this is current appointment _ radio, and this one is the same. So they both have the same name, but they have a different value of yes and no. But it applies a value of checked, a property of checked, and that's what I'm targeting. So I'm saying if the yes button is checked and the value is 1, then I want to show it. But if the no value is checked and if the value is 0. So it's kind of a double, I'm kind of catching two properties that instead of just relying on the value of 0 and 1, I'm saying, is the yes button checked, and is it also, did this value get assigned 1? And if, or, is this radio button checked no and the value equals 0? So it's just a little bit of extra insurance. So I know it looks complicated, but it's really one of those things where if you really break it down piece by piece, it's very simple. And that's one of the things we do as programmers is we kind of take these abstractions and slowly break them down into like manageable pieces and kind of walk through them. But the JavaScript injector is really nice. It, if you know how to do JavaScript, you can put your code in there. We have one of our other colleagues who is working on API stuff and adding buttons dynamically and things like that. And it also allows, because a lot of the times I would use Shazam to design something, and in Shazam it has its own Shazam has its own little JavaScript window, and a lot of the times I would just use that. So it's nice that I don't have to implement Shazam in order to still use JavaScript and fix some of this functionality. So hopefully being able to hide the submit button will be a big help for us whenever we have to kind of cut people off, and that way we're not having to go through and clean out a lot of blank surveys where people didn't really need to submit things. So that's pretty much it for me. If anybody wants me to explain anything else or go into detail or have any questions, just let me know.